Apple's service revenue successes, and the great App Store debate begins. This is MacVoices. Today's MacVoices is supported by Kolide. Kolide ensures only secure devices can access your cloud apps. It's zero trust, tailor-made for Okta. Book a demo today at kolide.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's a Valentine's Day MacVoices Live on YouTube at youtube.com/MacVoicesTV. We have a surprisingly large panel and a very nice crowd in the chat room as well. I'm not sure what that says about our respective love lives, but hey, that's just the way it goes. But I've also been informed by our panel that, let's see, it's Frederick Douglass's birthday. It is, according to the chat room, it's Arizona's birthday. And it's also the anniversary of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So choose your holiday wisely. That's all I can tell you.
Also, it is Chocolate Lovers Month, and it is National Children's Dental Health Awareness Month. There's some delicious irony there.
Yeah, really. That's almost as bad as having it on Halloween. But so anyway, yeah. So we're going to see what happens here tonight. We have a few stories. We have a lot of fun people, and we're just going to let it rip. So let's go around the room, see who made it here tonight. And if not, we hope the other panel members are enjoying the evening with their significant others. First up, in the corner of the angels, David Ginsburg is here. David, good to have you.
Good to be here, Chuck. Thanks for having me. It is Valentine's Day, but we're okay with that. And I don't mind.
Yep, exactly. Eric is here. Eric, it's good to see you. We just talked yesterday, although only you and Jeff and I know that because that show hasn't been released yet, but it's great to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be back, even if it's, right away.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Exactly. Raining outside, so it's nice and comfortable inside. My lime tree started blooming, so yeah, it's a good night.
Did you say lime tree?
Yeah.
Okay. You grow your own limes?
Well, not yet, but I'm hopeful this year.
Okay.
The lemons are just little teeny tiny things, so hopefully the lime tree will catch up.
Okay, this is a man who's dedicated to a serious margarita. He's growing his own limes.
I was thinking gin mule, but yeah, margarita, that works too.
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of California, that wouldn't be a big deal, but Eric's in Wisconsin.
Yeah, well,
that's not what you think of for citrus.
I have my fingers crossed.
we will now. We will now. Speaking of gin, Jeff Gamet is here. Jeff, good to see you.
It's good to see you, Chuck. And you made a comment about you don't know what it says about our love lives that we're all here. What it says is that I love all of you, and I'm so happy to get to spend such an important day with my extended digital family.
Well said, Jeff. Well said. I especially agree on the extended digital family. It's funny what happens when you get a group together like this once a week we've been doing this for a while, and it does turn into a bit of a family. And we have the family too in the chat room as well, because we have the same folks showing up week after week, and we enjoy them as well. Last but not least, from somewhere out in space, Mr. Jim Ray has arrived. Jim, good to see you. Are you coming in on one of those UFOs? Are you going to be shot down?
I hate to break it to you, but we are all coming from somewhere out in space.
What?
Wow. Okay. That's one of the most deep and profound things I have heard, and it is so true. Coming to you live from outer space, MacVoices.
My background is just a little more zoomed out than those of yours.
Yes, I told you it's going to be a weird night, folks. I told you it's going to be a weird night. Oh, man. Well, and I think there's one more that may be joining us a little bit later. Of course, that's one that checked in and said that he might be. So we'll see. So we have a couple different things I want to bring up tonight. The first one, and for some reason I'm still having trouble throwing things into the YouTube chat room, so I'll just have to throw it into our private chat. And then, folks, if you want to see it, we'll describe it, and you can go and get it yourselves later. I'm sorry about that. My chat window has not appeared. Where it is? There it is.
It's not a link, I guess. It probably is a link, huh?
Yeah, it is. It is. But this is an article that came out from Finbold, is it?
Yeah, Finbold.
That basically,
whatever that is.
Yeah,
News in bold.
Yeah, it's a finance. It's a finances app, or excuse me, site. But it says Apple services now generate. The headline is Apple services now generate more revenue than Nike and McDonald's combined. Now that's just the services, and I first heard about this on Ken Ray's show, macOS Ken, where they're comparing, Apple's services revenue, just that portion of the Apple business, and it beats out a staggering number of companies that you would think of as, monsters. And that they include Coca-Cola, Boeing, Nike, American Airlines, again, McDonald's, Netflix. This is just what Apple makes on services.
I think we could just generalize to anything Apple does is bigger than any other two things.
Well, Jim, I agree with you, but when you think about it, and again, I'm going to quote from the article: the revenue emanated from services including Apple iCloud, I guess is what they meant, Apple TV, Apple App Store, Apple Music, Apple Arcade, and Apple Fitness Plus. And I don't think of any of those as, I didn't up till reading this article, I didn't think of any of those as being like massive until I looked at this, and I guess it's the combination of all of them. I would have thought Apple Music and iCloud might have been the largest, but
I would have assumed App Store is the largest.
The App Store,
I think App Store is probably bigger than all of those put together.
Yeah, but just the idea that Apple is making this much money, and we all can remember when there was a bit of a discussion about should Apple be getting into services and how they were accounted.
I think developers are very painfully aware of this number. Like, hey, that's our 30%.
Well, you're right, Jim. This has not been without controversy, that part of it anyway. But at the same time, we've had that discussion a number of times here on the show. And I don't know, I look at it and just think, okay, they built the store, they maintain the store, they maintain the security and all that. I'm not about to tell you what, a local store would charge you to put a product in their store.
Well, but local stores, their percentage was typically 80 or 90%, not 30%.
What's 80 or 90%?
The cut that retailers, like physical retailers, would take versus Apple.
No, they take like teeny tiny little percentages.
They were making a lot more off of the products. Now, so their actual in-store cut, depending on everything else that played into their expenses, would be a low percentage. But based on the amount of money that a company would make selling to a physical retailer, they can make a lot more with Apple taking a 30% cut than they would make if they had a physical product in a store.
I thought we weren't having this discussion.
Oh, we weren't, and yet here we are. Underpants.
Yes. I mean, yeah, we can have that discussion if we want to, but at the end of the day, it also crosses over into the question of, is the App Store a monopoly? But on the other hand, Apple's building the iPhone and the iPad. I see you shaking your head, Jim.
I didn't say anything.
Yeah. All those stellar dust clouds were being agitated by the
right.
motion.
Now we
of your
just
head.
lost another nebula. Think of all the stars that don't get to be born. I hope you're happy now.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of different angles to it, but at the end of the day, it is what it is until somebody says it can't be. And there are various factions that would like to see that happen, but I don't know what that would do. I mean, if that 30% got cut down to 20%, 10%, I mean, okay, Jim, we'll put you on the spot. What do you think is a fair number?
10.
Wow. Okay.
Do we know what Apple spends to maintain the App Store? Because that would help us determine what would be a fair percentage.
Well,
so
and
if they
also
take 10%, does that mean that Apple would be taking a loss? And I honestly don't know.
I don't.
Apple seems to think it's fine that Facebook and Amazon and Twitter and on and on and on, all the things that are free, that are huge, amounts of downloads, and Apple makes nothing off of them. So apparently that's okay. Apple's decided that, we can give this away to the biggest players, but it just depends on how you make your money. If you make your money by selling advertising, then okay, Apple's service is free. But if you actually want to, not make the user, you don't want to sell the user, then, you've got to pay through the nose.
Okay, thank you, Jim. You put me in the very uncomfortable position of defending Google and Facebook. But I would think there's a whole lot less cost associated with maintaining those accounts outside of bandwidth. I mean, let's just take that out. But it's an interesting point.
Well, we know what you can look at Stripe or, various other payment services. We know what that costs, so we can look at what the cost is for providing payment services. And it ain't 30%. I'm a Stripe customer, and it's like 3.5%. And, if you go to things like Gumroad or whatever that are doing a little more, it's 6-7%, but it's not 30%. So,
well, Apple's providing more than just the transaction service.
Right, but that's the only thing that differentiates a for-pay app from free app.
Yes. Okay. Here's the way I see it, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but it's just the way I see it. What Apple's doing by allowing some of the big name players to skate by without having to pay the 30%, this is Apple's strategy for buying visibility for the platform and buying relevance for the platform. And even though the iPhone is the big mobile platform today, if it were to lose those big names, then it would eventually lose relevance. And Apple doesn't want that. Therefore, they are subsidizing the platform in that sense by allowing the big name players to have a deal that no one else gets.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's really big name players. There's lots of small free apps. And and most of that App Store money, is like Candy Crush and whatnot, That's, I think, why, they made the small developer program, which, it's like, okay, we'll give you 15%, because honestly, we don't care. The amount of money we get from you is tiddlywinks anyway. So it's just, we'll get some good PR by lowering it to 15%. So I'm not sure that it's like big versus little. In some ways, this is a clash of the titans that, has nothing to do with me, and I'm not in the App Store. But it's like, well, who's going to get the money? What the heck's whatever name, big game companies or Apple. They're fighting over. It's a power thing. And they're really, neither one of them are very sympathetic characters.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by Kolide at kolide.com/MacVoices. Our sponsor, Kolide, has some big news. If you're an Okta user, they can get your entire fleet to 100% compliance. How? If a device isn't compliant, the user can't log into your cloud apps until they fix the problem. It's that simple. Kolide patches one of the major holes in zero trust architecture, device compliance. Without Kolide, IT struggles to solve basic problems like keeping everyone's OS and browser up to date. Unsecure devices are logging into your company's apps because there's nothing there to stop them. Kolide is the only device trust solution that enforces compliance as part of authentication, and it's built to work seamlessly with Okta. The moment Kolide's agent detects a problem, it alerts the user and gives them instructions to fix it. If they don't fix the problem within a set time, they're blocked. Kolide's method means fewer support tickets, less frustration, and most importantly, 100% fleet compliance. Visit kolide.com/MacVoices to learn more or book a demo. That's Kolide, KOLIDE.com/MacVoices. Kolide.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Kolide for their support of MacVoices. So Ben in the chat room says, depends on if cutting that 30% would bring app types to the store that bring in more revenue. Apple is making all that money on 30% of relatively cheap apps. Brian points out that something that's so easy to overlook and we often forget it, but he asks, and correctly so, does Apple still cheer that percentage down? Doesn't it move to 15% after the first year for the companies with lower than $1 million in gross revenue?
Yeah,
Actually,
that's what Jim was talking about.
Yeah. Well, there's two things. One is if you're under $1 million in revenue, you can apply for the small business program, and it's 15% right away if you get in that program until you go above it. The other is if it's a subscription app, the revenue goes to 15% after the first year. So if you have a customer, the first year of that customer subscription, Apple gets 30%. The second year, Apple gets 15%. Now, originally it was just 30% all across the board. So these are changes they made later
in response to developer concerns.
I think more, they're worried that like the EU is going to come in and say, you're a monopoly and we're going to take the whole thing away. So they're trying to give away pieces to forestall that, small pieces, make sure they get to keep the big pieces, which, if I was Tim Cook, that's what I'd do too, I guess.
Sure.
David,
but when Exxon does it, everyone's like evil corporation. And when
well,
Apple
to be
does
fair,
it,
Exxon is an evil corporation.
They are. Yeah. Well, right. But the point is that Apple gets a pass for some reason. Even when they're doing
maybe it has something
things.
to do with Apple's lack of massive oil spills or underpants.
Yeah. David, is the App Store, and I want to ask the chat room too. Do you all feel that the App Store is a monopoly? And Jim, I know no more stellar cloud destruction. We understand that you do.
No, I don't think it's a monopoly. I think it's open but protected. It's protected from all the gobbledygook that's in all the other app stores that are on other platforms like Android. And I personally don't think it's a monopoly. I know a lot of people out there do think that. But I mean, we knew when services when they came out with these Apple bundles and being able to have everybody buy everything at once and making it so much easier to do that compared to having to buy everything individually. I mean, when you look at the trend here, the Apple bundle's been around for maybe a year or two, and boy, it's made quite a quite a leap in Apple services revenue. That's for sure. I mean, the last quarter was just phenomenal. So, but no, I don't think it's a. I personally think it's not.
Can I suggest a thought experiment?
Sure.
Imagine Apple App Store, as it is now, and somehow magically tomorrow, Elon Musk is in charge of it.
God forbid.
Why? It's not a monopoly. The fact is, it is a monopoly, but it's a kind of benevolent monopoly. So and there are definitely benefits to it. I'm not sure that I feel like the Wild West is the best way. But the best form of governance is a benevolent king, right? I mean that's but the problem is the kings wind up not being benevolent eventually.
I'm not sure that's the best example, Jim. But hey, before we go farther, I want to welcome the man who came in second as the MVP for the Super Bowl, Web Bixby, right behind Patrick Mahomes.
My good friend Patrick Mahomes. So,
Your
hello,
good
everybody.
friend, Patrick.
Yeah, and I want to talk to Jim about this 10% margin that Apple should charge us. I was eating spaghetti at the time, and it went all over the room when he said that.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had been there.
I want to see that.
Glad to do my part, Web.
Web, before you get into that, I asked the question of the chat room: Is it a monopoly? Yes or no? Paul says no. Ben says yes. Brian says, with the importance that I need my phone to be safe from a security standpoint, I appreciate everything going through the App Store. I feel better to save passwords, credit card numbers, etc. And Ben it chimes in with the iOS App Store has been instrumental in stifling AAA gaming on Apple platforms. And Ben seems to take issue with the word benevolent. I can't get Xbox Game Pass on my iPhone due to Apple's policies. I don't think that's right, Ben. Maybe I'm the last one that should be talking about Xbox, but what policies are you talking about other than
I know what he's talking about.
Oh, okay.
What he's talking about is Xbox or Microsoft wants to do that whole Game Pass where you have access to all the apps through one thing. And Apple says, no, you need to have a separate app for each game. And because of that, Microsoft is not doing their whole Game Pass on iOS. And I don't blame them. What a total pain in the ass that would be for them to have to manage all of that content in a completely different way than they already do for just to support iOS.
Jeff, remind me to bring that up later. I want to come back to that later, but we'll finish this discussion first.
Whether you want to call it a monopoly or not, I mean, there's no question that Apple is, hugely bending the market there. Like, for example, Kindle. I've got a Kindle reader on my iOS device. If I want to buy a book, I can't buy it through that app. That would be the obvious thing that, I would want to do.
That's Amazon's choice.
That's Amazon's. Yep.
No, it's Apple's choice. It is Apple will not let you buy digital goods in an app. Forbidden.
I thought you could as long as you paid, or as long as the company paid their 30%.
Well, okay.
So it's not forbidden.
It's
They're
not
just choosing not to do it.
You have to pay, which is impossible. That margin isn't there, right? That's not possible. There's no 30% margin that Kindle could give away to Apple. And secondly, you have to do it through Apple's APIs, which would mean that, they'd have to put like millions of, that's also impossible. And, whether you say it's good or bad, how can you say that is not, Apple changing, the rules into which how things are done? You on the web, people do what they want. and customers either buy it or they don't. On iOS devices, you either play by, and I guarantee you there are tons of apps that have never been created and never become available because people just like, you know what, I can't take the risk that, our investors basically say that we can't take the risk that, we develop this thing and then Apple says, no soup for you.
Somebody correct me though. I want to make sure, because Jim, I want to make sure that one point is accurate. As far as there's a prohibition on selling digital goods, don't game manufacturers do that all the time in the App Store, that they can sell things? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, they can.
They can do it through Apple's APIs.
Right, but those are digital goods, so there's no prohibition.
But there's no way that Amazon could sell 5 million books through Apple's APIs. Apple's APIs won't, so they'd have to, it works fine. Like, oh, I've got a game and I've got like 3 in-app purchases. Okay, you can do that. But, there's no way, imagine trying to use Apple's in-app purchase mechanism, which I think is pretty, crummy anyway. Like, you look at an app and it's like, I can't even figure out what are these things. Right? Anybody else have that problem? You look at it and it's like, oh, there's 5 different in-app purchases or 10, and they've got these tiny little descriptions. Like, I don't even know what is this. What do I get if I buy this?
Jim, I understand your point.
Imagine if there was 2 million in-app purchases, and it had to be selected through that API, which is what it would be.
Web, take off, because I also want to get you in on the 10% discussion.
Yeah, there are. I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. I understand that the 30% that margin that or a haircut that Apple puts in, and that could be somewhat excessive to some people. I think the book model is a little bit different than it is for the apps, but I could be wrong. And I also, just right up front, Jim has a perspective on this that I don't, being a developer. So I can understand kind of where he's coming from. I also think that, as Jeff started to point out earlier, that there is an awful lot of infrastructure that Apple has already paid for, and they put in place, they maintain it, and they have to do that. So they have some overhead. So it's not like the 10% or 30% is all just pure profit. But and remember that Apple developed the whole App Store for really one reason. It wasn't to distribute software for their products. It was to generate revenue for themselves. So that's kind of my take on it. Some of the things were said earlier about the safety and the security and knowing that the app's been vetted is something that I, as a consumer, I do appreciate. But if they cut it from 30% to 20%, say, do you think the vendors are going to decrease their prices? I don't see that happening. They're going to increase their margins. So anyway, there's some of my thoughts.
So Paul in the chat room says, how much would you spend if Apple wasn't there to take it to market, it being an app, just to get it in front of your customers? And I think that's a piece that, if there was an app store, I mean, how would you find apps? And we have an issue of discoverability, and we know that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I know where I can go to look for apps for my phone. And the search capabilities may not be great, but they're not terrible.
I know where to go to. Google. You will never find an app in the App Store. Even if you know the exact name of it, 3 out of 4 times you type that name in and you get, a bunch of other crap before you find the thing that you actually want. I think that's a reverse argument, that Apple is a negative, and certainly Apple is not putting your app in front of customers unless you get featured.
But they're giving you that place to go, that store, if you will, to go and access it. Just like if I want to go and buy, a pair of Dockers pants, okay, I've got to go to the department store to get Dockers pants because the grocery store doesn't sell them. and the gas station certainly doesn't sell them. So,
well, they probably have it on a website. That's a URL. URLs cost $15 a year.
Yeah, but
Well, that's actually not a fair statement. The URL costs $15 a year, but you also have the cost of hosting and the cost for all the people that are maintaining your website, and then the cost of data, and then the cost of the databases, and on and on and on.
And let's go back. We just said what, $74 billion. Apple is not spending $74 billion on hosting and all that other stuff. They might be spending $100 million. That's, wildly, it's not free, but it's not $74 billion worth.
All right. So here's another thought
that's sort of where we start. We're celebrating that Apple has managed to extract $74 billion for these services. And, I submit that that's, Google also is, extracting this huge, and they've made a monopoly of advertising, and, they're, you basically have to go through Google if you want to advertise, and they're charging wildly inflated prices.
So, Jim, I think it's really interesting, though, that you would direct me to Google as opposed to an app store. So you're encouraging me to go sell myself to Google.
No. I'm telling you that if I want to find an app, this is just I'm not directing you. I'm telling you, if I want to find something, I will never go to the app store and search, because I know that's hopeless. I go to Google and do the search, and then find the exact thing, and maybe hopefully it has a click here to open the app store, because I know that so I'm speaking as a consumer when I'm saying go to Google, not as a as a developer or whatever. I'm just saying for my own uses, when I want to find something, the app store, it just doesn't work for me. Maybe it works for you, and I know a lot of people that say the same thing as I'm saying. It just doesn't work. And I never go to the app store except, hopefully I've got a link that says open an app store, and it goes right to it, and I can do my thing and get out. Secondly, if I just have a name, okay, then, we can try it. And then, but, invariably, even though I've got the exact name of the app, then I've still got to wade through a bunch of other stuff to get to what that is.
All right. So another question, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So we've been talking about how much revenue Apple's bringing in through its services. Is there any chance we're conflating that with profit they're making on services? How much of this revenue are they actually spending to maintain and support these services?
Well, that's why the question of whether it's monopoly is important. If it's not a monopoly, no, of course, companies can make whatever. There should be no limit. But if it's a monopoly, then yes, we do say that companies that are monopolies there should be oversight and regulation. So that's why the most real important question is it monopoly?
Eric, you've been very quiet. You did post something in our private chat a little while ago that you asked if Apple services were spun out into a separate company, would it still work? I don't know. I mean, I would think that would make, at least in theory, some of the integrations a little bit more difficult between some of the services and the hardware.
Well, that really depends on what was spun off.
Yeah, I mean, again, taking a look at that services issue, iCloud, iCloud is integrated. Apple TV, maybe not quite so much. The App Store obviously is. Apple Music obviously is. Apple Arcade is. I can't speak to Apple Fitness Plus.
It's integrated.
So, I mean, how much of a separate company? I mean, FileMaker is not the best example, but it's the only one I can think of right off the bat that that was spun off into a separate company. And I think Apple still owns
No,
that.
it's not.
It was, but
Not
it
a
was brought
separate
back
company.
in.
It never
is
was
it?
a separate company.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. Yes,
Yeah,
it was. I'll
it
guarantee
doesn't
you
have-
it was. I'll guarantee you it was.
No,
Yeah.
it's always been part of Apple. They've done naming, and they've never it's weird because Apple's never emphasized that it's part of Apple. They still don't, but it's been a wholly owned entity of Apple since it was bought from Neshoba in the early 90s. I mean, Claris was part of Apple as well.
Yeah, I forgot about Claris. Yeah.
Which, FileMaker was part of Claris, and then they basically renamed it, FileMaker was the same entity, but it's, it doesn't have a separate profit and loss, doesn't have, it's just, it's part of Apple. I mean, Tim Cook can do what he wants with it.
FileMaker, Ben says FileMaker is a wholly owned subsidiary.
Right. So, that's not really a separate company, I don't think.
If it's a subsidiary, it has its own balance sheet and income statement. Just because Apple owns all the shares, if you will.
But it's privately held, so if Apple Services was spun out that way, would we really say that was separate? I don't think so.
On the next edition of Mac Voices, the panel continues their App Store monopoly debate, the chat room weighs in, and the issue of app discoverability might point to an Apple search engine. That's next time on Mac Voices. I'll see you then. As always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.